watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now for a closer look at some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Representative Carol Spackman-Moss and State Senator Todd Weiler. Great to have both of you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Glenn.
Morning.
Let's get right into the Department of Justice filing that lawsuit against Idaho's abortion law. The AG really taking issue with the idea that a provider doing an abortion as applied to women suffering medical emergencies, that's what he says he's making his case around. Representative, let's start with you. Your take on this play from the administration.
Well, that law in Idaho, the trigger law, is clearly violating the federal law because the federal law requires in a medical emergency, anyone going to a hospital, they must be stabilized and treated. So if a woman comes in and she's bleeding from a miscarriage or even a botched abortion, it doesn't matter, but mostly miscarriage, a doctor might be at risk of a felony charge if he treats her. And that's just draconian, not to mention the fact that it violates the supremacy clause because federal law supersedes state law. So that is a huge problem for women, and it could result in deaths or serious injury to a lot of women.
Senator, your assessment on this move by the DOJ?
Well, the federal law is tied to Medicaid funding, so it only applies if the hospital accepts Medicaid funding, which is, quite frankly, probably almost every hospital in the country. But you know, I think that the lawsuit has a point, and I want your viewers to understand, Glenn. Idaho's law is a lot stricter than Utah's law, and so we have had this law in place for years that if you go to an emergency room, you can't be turned away with a life-threatening situation. But I want to put this in perspective. Less than 1% of the abortions in this country affect the health of the mother. And so, you know, we're kind of dancing around the periphery here. Over 99% of the abortions in this country don't affect the health of the mother. Many of them are you know, it's an option for someone who didn't use birth control, or as a plan B, if you will, or plan C. But in any event, I do agree with Representative Spackman that the life of the mothers should be preserved, and you know, I think that Idaho is going to probably have to take a look and make sure that their law clarifies that allows doctors to do that.
There's a lot of argument, even though with our state law, which, as you point out correctly, Senator, is different than what we're talking about in Idaho. But there's a lot of argument still that it's vague what that means, what the definition is. Representative, your thoughts on that?
Well, our trigger law in Utah, it really is flawed. And for one thing, that it requires two doctors to concur that the fetus isn't viable, or, you know, if a woman, again, is hemorrhaging and is having a miscarriage and someone thinks it maybe isn't legitimate, it would require two doctors. One of our legislators, Representative Lesser, who was an OBGYN for 35 years, says at 3 in the morning, when a mother is bleeding seriously, you can't call two doctors to come in and verify. I mean, that's one huge problem, but there are others too that are vague about that trigger law, and they really need to be addressed.
Senator, your thoughts on that? Do we need to take a look at this trigger law and make some adjustments to it?
Well, I'm sure that there will be adjustments to the trigger law, and we want to get the policy right. But let's be clear. I mean, we're talking about ending the life of an unborn child, and so we don't want one doctor who may be a pro-abortion advocate. And we have several doctors that fit that description in Salt Lake City, and I've talked to many of them. They are clearly cheerleaders for abortion, and that's their constitutional right under free speech. But all this law is saying is you need to have two people agree that the mother's you know, life is in question. And I think Representative Spackman and Representative Lesser have raised valid points, and I think the legislature should be looking at making sure those details are the right policy.
Let's dig into the dynamic of what we're seeing play out here. We had this ruling by the Supreme Court. Now we have the Department of Justice responding. Is this a power struggle that we're starting to see, and will there be more lawsuits to follow? Representative.
Well, look what happened in Kansas last night. I think people are saying this has gone way too far, and we're talking about women's rights, and it relates to health care and reproductive justice. And I think that was a big signal. And I think in Idaho, the same thing, the Department of Justice saying, this is so so draconian, so strict and severe. We need to address this. And the other thing about Utah's and other states, when they're talking about rape, requiring them to report to law enforcement before they could perform an abortion, when less than 10% of all rapes are even reported, that's another area that really has to be looked at, because incest, another one. I mean, when that 10-year-old girl was pregnant and had to go to another state for an abortion, and then the doctor might be charged with a criminal penalty, that's just inhumane. We really need to address those aspects of any of these trigger laws.
Senator, your thoughts on this dynamic we're seeing play out between DOJ and the Supreme Court?
Well, I think that there are people who are really, really, really pro-abortion, and they're going to continue to, nip at the edges and try to prevent states from, like Utah, from outlawing abortions unless the health of the mother is at risk, or the pregnancy results from rape or incest. I support those exceptions. We might have some people try to close those exceptions, and I would vote against those. But quite frankly, if that 10-year-old girl who was raped by her mother's boyfriend, who was an illegal immigrant, and the media didn't want to report that for a while, if that girl had been in Utah, she wouldn't have had to leave the state. And there's many arguments that she didn't really have to leave her home state. Fortunately, she did get the medical care she was seeking in Indiana.
So does that bring up an issue then with this patchwork of law across the country that's potentially problematic, where depending on the state you live in, the rules are completely different? Representative?
It absolutely does. I mean, look at the maps right now. When I look at those maps and see the states where they could go and how far they are from some states that ban abortions altogether and have no exceptions, it's going to be a disaster. I mean, women will suffer, women will die, who have legitimate reasons for having an abortion, not just, oh, I didn't use birth control, I forgot. And then there's going to be an increase in the use of the abortion pills, and sometimes those result in problems that they have to seek medical care. So I think we're just going to see this play out in ways that are dangerous and life-threatening to many women.
Your thoughts on that, Senator? A situation where a woman living, say, in Grand County, Utah, has different rules than an hour away in Mesa County, Colorado.
Well, we have 50 states. The states created the federal government. All of the rights that weren't given to the federal government were preserved for the states. This is everything that a fourth grader should know about the founding of our country. And yeah, we're going to have sometimes different laws in different states. You can buy a Powerball ticket in Idaho and you can't in Utah. This is not unfamiliar, but let's be honest. If you lived in St. George or Cedar City, it was always closer to go to Las Vegas for an abortion than it was for Salt Lake. Same with Green River versus Colorado versus Utah. And so for people outside of the Wasatch Front, they're used to traveling to other states because Utah is such a big state. But I don't think that there's anything inherent. The people of Utah don't want the legislatures of California and New York setting our laws. And I think that Utah, the trigger law, I think the majority of Utahns do support that, and I think it should also, maybe be tweaked if circumstances warrant.
Okay, we have about a minute left, but I want to get into one other quick topic real fast: the Inflation Reduction Act. According to a Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation, it will spend $260 billion over the next 10 years and raise taxes $326 billion over that same time period. Representative, is that the way to get out of inflation?
Well, I think those numbers can be disputed, but some of the basic tenets are this. It will reduce the cost of prescription drugs because Medicare can negotiate directly with pharmaceutical companies. It will reduce the cost of health care because the ACA will be extended. It will make, it will cap out of pocket costs for seniors. This is really going to help seniors and middle and low income folks. It also has a carbon emissions part that will help the climate. But here's a key part. With better tax regulations, we'll have more demand, fairer taxes, with money that will go into increasing manufacturing and start manufacturing batteries and chips and things from others that other countries have. that's going to bring back manufacturing and increase jobs and wages. So
okay, we've run out of time real quick. I need to give the senator just a few seconds to respond. Senator
Number one, there's no effect on inflation until 2027. Number two, it's like bringing a squirt gun to a house engulfed in flames. That's what Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, they're bringing us, if your house is on fire, they show up with a squirt gun and say, we're going to help put it out.
All right,
That's
on that note, we'll have to end it there. Really insightful conversation. I appreciate having you both here. Thanks for being with us. Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break with more Inside Utah Politics.